gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Robert Walton has been jet-setting in recent weeks in Singapore for the YYY Awards and then back to London to host the inaugural Restaurant Association Awards.
Yep, and after many years in the industry, Robert also knows a thing or two about how to create the perfect Christmas. And it's all in the preparation. So we're going to be asking him about that as well. I'm delighted to say that the godfather of hospitality, Robert Walton, MBE, joins us now on the sofa.
Morning, Robert.
Robert,
Good
so
morning.
good to see you. And what a busy few weeks you have had. Yeah. Should we start with the YYY Awards? Because I think it's just wonderful who you celebrated at those awards.
So, the YYY, young chef, young waiter, young mixologist. And it's a competition that's created around the world. So people from all around the world can apply. So this year we had 9 countries, from India to the Caribbean, from the USA to Scotland and England. And so we had 27 young professionals. The average age was about 24.
Wow.
All coming to Singapore. So we flew everyone to Singapore. We create what I call the Olympic Village. We create a little village for them, and it's in a very cool spot with great bars. And then we have the competition. And this year, I can now announce, I was here just a few weeks ago before we had the competition, that the USA won, which was absolutely incredible. Thailand was second. And gorgeous Wales was third.
Yes.
Well done, Wales.
Well done, Wales.
We now expect to have a good meal. There's no reason why you shouldn't have good food. The key now is the service, because there's no reason why you don't have good service. And good service is not that difficult. Smile, to start with. It really isn't that difficult. It's called hospitable. We call the industry, or the sector we look after is the hospitality industry, which is all about being hospitable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good evening. You're watching State of the Nation on GB News right here with me, Matt Goodwin. Happy New Year. On tonight's show, the FBI has announced that it believes the New Orleans terror attack suspect did not act alone. We'll be bringing you all of the updates and what this means for the incoming Trump administration. Meanwhile, for British politics, are we looking at a completely new political reality that tears apart the two-party system? The UK's leading pollster will be with us. He's warned that Labour is really at risk from the Reform Party. He's going to be talking us through what he means by that and what the next year is going to look like. Meanwhile, our political leaders' New Year's messages tell us everything we need to know about who is gaining momentum and who is looking stale. Plus, former Home Secretary Suella Braverman will be joining me live right here on this show to react to the viral court transcript of the Oxford grooming gang trial, which has revealed the utter horror that has been taking place right here on Britain's streets. So I want to talk to Suella Braverman about what this is really all about. But this is, with me tonight, State of the Nation with Matt Goodwin. It starts now. Now, I'll also be joined by my panel tonight, including former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. As ever, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay. And, of course, reach out to me at GoodwinMJ on X. But right now, it's time for the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Good evening. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. The suspect, accused of driving a truck through a crowd in New Orleans, killing 10 people and injuring at least 35, has been identified as 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar. The FBI are investigating this morning's deadly attack as an act of terrorism. They have provided more details on the attacker, saying he's a US citizen from Texas, and they do not believe he acted alone. They added that an ISIS flag was located in the vehicle, and they're working to determine the subject's potential associations and affiliations with terrorist organisations. Weapons and a potential improvised explosive device were also located in the vehicle. Other potential IEDs were also located in the French Quarter. Local police said the driver of the vehicle got out and opened fire on police, with 2 officers shot, but in a stable condition, while the suspect was declared dead at the scene. The US President Joe Biden says he has been continually briefed on the incident and that he is grateful for the brave and swift response of local law enforcement in preventing even greater death and injury. Meanwhile, Donald Trump says his administration will fully support the city of New Orleans as it investigates and recovers from this morning's attack. In other news now, Sir Keir Starmer has hailed 2024 as a year of change as he shared his first New Year's message as Prime Minister. Sir Keir declared that the UK will embark on a year of rebuilding and rediscovering the nation we are in 2025.
Until you can look forward and believe in the promise and the prosperity of Britain again, then this government will fight for you.
But the Conservatives have accused Labour of offering change for the worse, as Kemi Badenoch used her own New Year's message to warn that efforts to turn around Tory fortunes would be bumpy.
Happy New Year. Like all of you, I am looking forward to a 2025 that is full of hope, security and prosperity. The Conservative Party is also going through a period of change. This process of renewal will be a long-term project. Things may be bumpy along the way, but the party I now lead is going to do things differently. Watch this space.
Now, a major incident has been declared in Greater Manchester after flooding forced homes to be evacuated and closed train lines and roads following heavy rain. More than 100 flood warnings have been issued across the UK as rain continues to batter parts of the country on the first day of 2025. Meanwhile, a 3-day snow warning has been issued for almost all of England and parts of Scotland this weekend, as the Met Office has warned rural communities could become cut off. And Jocelyn Wildenstein has died at the age of 84. The socialite, nicknamed Catwoman because she reportedly had many facial surgeries in the hope of resembling a cat, has passed away on Tuesday in Paris from a pulmonary embolism. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Happy New Year once again. Tonight, I will be covering everything from the looming threat of Nigel Farage and the Reform Party to Keir Starmer and Labour to grooming gangs with former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. This is a show you do not want to miss. But first, for the latest on that horrific news coming out of New Orleans and the terror attack, which has killed at least 10 people, I'm joined by Chairman of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Now, Greg, what is the latest from the ground? I know you've got some good connections down there. What are you hearing?
Yeah, we didn't learn much from the press conference, but they finally did admit that it is a terrorism investigation. And so the terrorist was eliminated. That's the good news. The bad news is what I'm hearing on the ground is a few things. One is that it might not have been a lone wolf. It might be that he was working with others. So that's one of the reasons they postponed the football game. So, which I think was the right move between Georgia and Notre Dame. It's difficult for the people traveling, but I think the risk is still there. So that's a concern right now. The other is that what we've learned on the ground is that the suspect had been reported while he was in the Army for having jihadist views or radical views, and this is something that's happened before. It happened in Fort Hood in 2009 when the assailant there, Nidal Hassan, had a long record in the military of having been radicalized, and they just ignored it because it was politically incorrect.
In fact, Greg, I believe we have a clip of the alleged perpetrator, the terrorist. We can show you this now, which is from a video we think linked to his professional role. Let's get that clip on for folks at home to have a look.
I just want to say hello and let you know a little bit about me. So I'm born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, and now live in Houston. And I've been here all my life. with the exception of traveling for the military, where I spent 10 years as a human resources specialist and IT specialist.
So, been here his whole life, speaking with an American accent, military veteran. I mean, this doesn't strike me as a sort of usual profile of a terrorist. I mean, what's your take on this?
It doesn't, but so many of the terrorist events in the last 20 years in the U.S. have been homegrown, but radicalized by sources abroad. That they're radicalized by, the sort of pro-jihadist media and pro-jihadist organizations. So, yeah, they're not illegal migrants like many suspected earlier today, but it's still the same problem. And I think that's, one of the things you're going to see that comes out of this, that this people just have to be honest, call it what it is.
Sure. We've also got a statement from President-elect Donald Trump. Now, I'm interested, let's have a quick look at that statement and show folks at home if we can. I'm interested in how this event is really going to impact on domestic American politics. You've got Trump coming into the White House. Here he is on Truth Social saying, look, I warned you about foreign criminals. I warned you about people coming into the country. He said that, he tried to tell the Democrats that this was going to happen, and he was deeply concerned about the likelihood of something like this. I mean, let's, fast forward Trump coming into office. What's this likely to lead to, perhaps? Are we going to see a revival of the sort of, the travel bans? Are we going to see a clampdown on domestic terrorism? How does this change the Trump presidency?
I don't think it will change that much, because he's been saying this for quite some time. If anything, it just reinforces, or it validates what he's been saying. But we don't need more of these events. We had, the New York City subway homicide last weekend or 2 weeks ago, which is just horrific.
This was the lady that was set on fire on the New York
26-year-old
subway.
beautiful young woman.
I mean, it's a horrific video.
Burnt to death by an arsonist, but also an illegal migrant. You had Laken Riley, the nursing student, killed at the University of Georgia, of all places, who's one of the teams playing in the game now tomorrow. She was going for a run in the middle of the day on campus, killed by an illegal migrant. But it's not only that, Matt. It's that they entered the country illegally. So it really is just discouraging to people who are citizens who have to run the risk of violence by these illegal migrants. But also, many of them have been convicted of other crimes and released by the George Soros-backed DAs who participated in bail reform, so-called bail reform, or defund the police movements. So they're letting convicted felons out of jail or not prosecuting them at all. And so, the Georgia incident was not only an illegal migrant, but he had been arrested in New York City and then left and went to another sanctuary city. So commit the crime.
At the same time, we know this will probably, I don't want to say play well for Donald Trump, but it validates a lot of what he's been warning America about.
That's right.
The other hand, we know the Democrats, having just been completely crushed at the election, are trying to get back into the minds of ordinary Americans. Have you seen anybody on the left of American politics within the Democrat Party come out today and say anything reasonable about this incident? Are they talking tough? Are they saying, look, we need to change our approach? Anything like that?
Not yet, but a few have come out in the last few months.
Right.
Just called out the absurdity of this, favoring criminals over victims. We see it in Chicago, my hometown, where the mayor and the DA just refused to prosecute criminals, and yet there were 500 homicides last year, and 80% of those victims are African American, and yet they call it racist if you prosecute criminals. So that, I think, is going to change. The sentiment is clearly changing in the U.S. right now. I hope it changes here as well.
We've actually also got an FBI statement that we can just put up on the screen at the moment, if we can just get that up for the folks at home as well. Clearly, the security agencies, the federal agencies here, are saying that they're very concerned that an ISIS flag here was located in the vehicle, giving a pretty good sign as to what was motivating this. The FBI is working to determine what this was really all about and what was driving the terrorist attack. So, I mean, again, it looks like you've got telltale signs of Islamist terrorism, but again, somebody who is fairly well integrated into American society. I mean, don't forget as well, this is coming off the back of the attack in Germany, where again we had the guy driving through the Christmas market. I mean, it feels to me as though we're getting, hopefully, into a more serious conversation in Western societies about how are we going to clamp down and stop Islamist extremism?
Yeah, I mean, look, the pro-Hamas media channels around the world were promoting attacks for New Year's Eve, and we saw one in Brussels last night, and of course the one in New Orleans today. In some ways, we were lucky that it was 4 a.m. and not midnight. The crowd really thins by that time. But yeah, it's got to stop, and I think this is another moment where people will learn from it.
Well, thank you, Greg Swenson. Really great to have you with us today. Obviously, it's a tragic incident. My heart goes out to everybody involved. After the break, we're going to be returning to domestic politics here in Britain as Sir Keir Starmer is warned that the real political threat against the Labour government is not coming from the Conservative Party. Watch this space. Join us back in a few minutes right here on State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
The birth rate in Britain has sunk to 1.49, well below replacement rate. Yet policies pursued by both major parties are still to spend huge sums to encourage parents back to their work when their children are still at preschool age. Should we not be helping parents to spend longer at home, asks his new book, whilst recognising that in an age of sex equality, the question is fraught. David Goodhart joins me now.
We undervalue the domestic realm, and that has led to lots of the most negative trends in British society. About half of children in the UK are not living with both of their biological parents by the age of 14. We have, of families with dependent children, about 24-25% are single-parent households. Mainly mothers, and they're doing, valiant work. But of course, it means you don't have the investment in children that a two-parent family can give. I mean, the reason why it's a care dilemma is that a lot of these negative trends are also kind of intimately related to positive things, like that movement of women into work, the fact that women are no longer so defined by marriage and motherhood, the fact that women and men are freer to leave unhappy relationships. And the challenge for modern liberal societies is, how we hold on to those freedoms but get a better balance, which means, I think, investing more in the domestic realm. We spend a total now of £9 billion on childcare subsidies. Why not give that subsidy direct to young parents so they could then choose whether to subsidise themselves, as it were, to be able to afford to stay at home, or to give it to a nursery, or to give it to granny, or to keep it in the home.
GB News.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, incompetent, dishonest and unsuccessful. These are the three most common characteristics that have been attributed to Keir Starmer's Labour government by the public, according to a devastating new opinion poll from YouGov, published for The Times. Incompetence, perhaps best embodied by Labour's conspicuous lack of plans to crack down on illegal migration, with the number of small boat crossings in 2024 up 25% on the previous year. Smashing the gangs, more like smashing the country, in my view. Dishonest, well, the word best epitomised perhaps by the series of post-election revelations that have become known as Donorgate or Freebiegate, when we saw Keir Starmer and many other Labour ministers taking lots of goodies from Lord Ali. And incompetence, well, inheriting the fastest growth in the G7 and then leading Britain to zero growth in the third quarter of last year, with an anticipated recession in 2025 is perhaps what inspired this characterisation. But the government's problems are arguably much deeper than falling short of these milestones that, incidentally, the public think they will ultimately fail to reach. Labour, as my next guest has pointed out, lacks a broader story about what it wants to do with the country. Keir Starmer has faced the biggest post-election fall in popularity in modern history. His leadership ratings are, to be frank, in the toilet. And a poll from the weekend had Labour losing its majority already, only being in power for a few months, with 67 of Labour's seats going not to the Conservatives, but going to Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. Cabinet Ministers Ed Miliband, Yvette Cooper and Angela Rayner were all down to lose their seats to Nigel Farage's Reform Party. Now, the UK's foremost pollster, Sir John Curtis, who we will speak to in a moment, has revealed that his own diagnosis. Reform is very good, says Sir John Curtis, at articulating that sense of discontent, lack of direction, lack of progress and lack of trust in politics. Keir Starmer doesn't really do a story. He doesn't do a narrative. He's a technocrat and he's not really a politician. He believes that if Labour delivers, then voters will applaud them. So Labour's only hope for the new year is to deliver on its promises, and he thinks that this will be enough. But it appears to be miles off. It betrayed the promise not to raise taxes on working people. The Labour government has failed to grow the economy, and its supposed plan to smash the gangs has, if anything, increased the number of migrants entering the country illegally. Meanwhile, the Reform Party is much more than just an anti-mass migration party. It voices a story of millions of socially conservative voters out there in the country, away from the bright lights of London, and asking themselves what on earth is happening to the country they love so much. The story of a lost Britain that existed before we entered the age of stagnation, of managed decline, the story that once binded citizens together, where our national identity mattered, where our identity was protected and preserved, before the ruling class in this country pushed the agenda of national self-flagellation onto the rest of us. We've already seen from the last election the progress that Nigel Farage and Reform have been making with barely any preparation, with only a dozen or so members of staff. The party came second in nearly 100 seats at the last general election, nearly 90 of which came in Labour areas. And at local council by-elections up and down the country, Reform's progress has often been coming at the expense of the Labour Party. So 2025 may well be the year that the two-party system is completely destroyed and the nation faces a complete political realignment. The local county council elections in the spring, I think, will be the next act in this political earthquake and may yet come to completely transform the political landscape. As ever, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay or tweet me at GoodwinMJ. But right now, I am joined by the country's leading pollster, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, Sir John Curtis, who joins us down the line. Now, John, if I may, I mean, to what extent, if you are Keir Starmer and his advisors in number 10 Downing Street, should you be concerned about the rise of Nigel Farage and Reform? Because as we saw with UKIP in earlier years, the dominant narrative is this is primarily a problem for the Conservative Party. But actually what you're saying here is Keir Starmer's lack of vision, his lack of story, may end up allowing Nigel Farage back into the Red Wall, Wales and other Labour heartlands. Is that right?
Yeah, so long as you realise you did use the verb may in that sentence. I think certainly, I basically take the view that Labour's difficulties in office, and in particular what you referred to, Sir Keir Starmer's difficulty in crafting a narrative and his relatively low popularity, these are all weaknesses that were evident when Labour were in opposition. And in a sense, one of the problems the Labour Party now faces is it really focused in the 3 or 4 years in the run-up to the 2024 election on the task of winning, a task that essentially was handed to it by mistakes made by the Conservative Party, not least over Partygate and the Liz Truss fiscal event. And it didn't necessarily always think about, well, what would necessarily be the form of positioning and the narrative that it might strike before the election that might make its life easier afterwards. So to that extent, at least, of course, that the one implication of that analysis is not going to be easy to turn around, because in a sense, we're now looking at fairly fundamental weaknesses in terms of Starmer's style of leadership of the Labour Party and the fact that he's never been popular with the wider public. Now, so far as reform are concerned, well, reform are potentially something of a threat to Labour. You're quite right to point out there are now about 90 constituencies where they start off in second place, and a poll at the weekend suggests actually once you go into the innards of it, what you discover is it's Labour's vote that's falling particularly markedly in some of those constituencies, rather than Reform's vote particularly rising. Reform are now picking up some of the discontent with Labour, but only some of it, because, again, as a poll from Survation pointed out today, some of the folk who are unhappy of Labour are the folk who think that Labour are too tough on migrants and who will follow the woke agenda that Reform are very much against. But they're wandering off to the Greens or the Liberal Democrats. And the Reform are still finding it easier to pick up Tory voters than Labour voters. But that said, they are now picking up some of the discontent with Labour. I think the question that Reform have to face, however, is that if they are going to really succeed in winning over Labour voters, they are actually going to have to pivot away from some of the agenda that you were talking about. Labour voters, for the most part, are not particularly concerned about immigration. Labour voters, for the most part, are in favour of reversing the Brexit decision. I think if Reform are going to succeed in eating away at Labour's vote, what they've got to focus on are the issues and the problems that were facing this country in July and on which so far the government hasn't made much discernible progress. That is, one, the economy, and two, the state of the public services. And I think the point simply is that Nigel Farage is very, very good at articulating the relatively pessimistic mood of the nation, but I think he's going to have to focus on those issues.
So, John, what you're saying is essentially the culture stuff isn't going to be enough for Farage. He's going to also have to come up with what we might call a sort of economically populist campaign to talk about some of those left-right economic issues. Now, here in the studio, thank you, Sir John Curtis. I'm joined by former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. John, if I can come to you, I mean, this is going to be a big problem for Keir Starmer in the Red Wall and areas like Wales, isn't it? I mean, Farage seems to cut through in those areas in a way that the Conservatives struggle.
Yes, I mean, the polling at this stage is very clear. It will clearly be different by the time we get to a general election. And there is all to play for both Reform and for the Conservatives. We're going to have a period of pretty intense competition. And in the Reform corner, you've got a very articulate Nigel Farage, who can't be blamed for any of the things that have gone on in the last 30 years because he didn't have any executive power, was never in office, up against the Conservative Party, which has to change in the way the leader is now saying, because they've just had 4.5 years of letting people down over immigration, over taxation, over economic growth, not being fast enough. And it's going to be a gripping contest because it's not all one-sided. Nigel has many advantages, but the Conservatives are the official opposition. They've got more MPs. They have the establishment of the opposition behind them. They respond first in the House to everything the government says. They have more backup and support. So Kemi is going to produce something rather more rounded, one assumes.
Well, let's just stick on this point about Kemi, because there's no doubt that Nigel Farage has looked emboldened over the Christmas break. You know, he feels as though he's been running circles around Kemi Badenoch.
Well, he did. I mean, it was stupid of Kemi Badenoch to...
So let me be direct. I mean, has she got what it takes, based on this early period, do you think? Has she got what it takes to stop Nigel Farage and Reform from going into all of those Labour areas and winning those seats that, of course, at one time, not too long ago, voted for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives?
Yeah, I mean, not from what we've seen, no. That she's come up with no ideas, discernible ideas. She says that she has to wait and formulate policy over a period of time. So I think that she made a huge error over the Christmas period, challenging Nigel Farage on his membership figures. There was no need to do that, no need to get involved whatsoever in that. That was obviously a mistake. The Tories don't like talking about their own own membership figures. And of course, all that puts is a spotlight on them and the fact that their membership is 96% white, 2/3 male, and mostly over 50. So they're not representative anyway of the country. I would have thought anyway that the Tories, being pretty ruthless, will change their leader at least once, possibly twice before the election.
Just before I come back to John briefly, so I remember briefing people like Ed Miliband in the early 2010s saying, look, the Labour Party is going to have a problem with UKIP and Farage, you know, and they didn't seem to really get it. And then, of course, we saw Brexit and we saw Farage become a serious force in those areas. Do you think Keir Starmer and the people around him get the kind of problem that Nigel Farage could become for the Labour Party in places like Wales, in places like the North East, in Yorkshire? Do you think they get it?
Yes, in a way they didn't get UKIP, yes, and I agree with that. OK,
and John, so, you know, not to put you on the spot, but the Conservatives are still very much on life support. They're not polling particularly high numbers. There is some concern about the new leadership of the party and whether Kemi Badenoch is capable at holding Farage off. I mean, if you were advising her, I mean, what would your bit of advice to Kemi Badenoch and the people at the top of the Conservative Party be when it comes to dealing with Farage and reform?
Well, my advice to the Conservative Party is you can't keep changing leaders. One of the things that destabilised the Conservative policy and position in the last Parliament was having 3 Prime Ministers in a single Parliament, and it looked ridiculous. So I think that the party has got to get behind Kemi and give her a bit of space and time. And my advice to Kemi would be, she's quite right not to want to put out the 28-29 manifesto now. Who knows what the problems will then be and how much money we'll have and so forth. But she now needs to build some campaigns, and I think she's got to have a campaign on how the Conservatives take migration very seriously and are sorry that they didn't get on top of it before. And I think she needs to rebuild a campaign for a lower tax, faster growth economy, because Labour's giving it to her on a plate. They have so wrecked the economy with one budget and all their gloom. And at least in her message, she said something positive about hope and expectation. But she needs to be the beacon of hope when the country is starved of it by a government that says it's all lousy and it's going to get worse.
Just very briefly, there is a risk, though, isn't there, for Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives, that the momentum, the speed at which this revolt seems to be taking off, membership numbers, defections, you know, national polling figures are pretty impressive, I think, for reform, about 24-25%. There's a risk here, isn't there, that this thing gets real momentum and actually Kemi Badenoch can't wait until 2027, 2028. But briefly.
2 things. First past the post system is unkind to small parties, so that gives reform a mountain to climb. Second thing is that when it comes to elections, the election manifesto the reform put out was pretty thin, and they need to do an awful lot of work, and they probably can't get that work done in the next 5 years.
So system and ideas. Well, thank you to my panel for joining and for sharing their ideas. After the break, we're going to be comparing the New Year's messages from our political leaders, from Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, and we're going to be looking at whether any of those messages really cut through with you, the British people watching at home. So see you in a few minutes.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Things are looking much colder now across the UK over the next few days. There'll be plenty of sunshine around during the day, but also lots of frost and ice around during the overnight periods. Wintry showers in places too. Low pressure starting to pull away to the east of the UK now. That's allowing a cold northerly airstream to become established, and that's set to dominate the weather across the UK over the next few days. So overnight tonight, the last of the rain clears from the far southeast fairly promptly. Showers ease across the central slice of the UK, but showers continue across the north and northwest in that northwesterly airstream. And wherever you are, it's set to turn very chilly overnight, and widespread frost forming, even in towns and cities, with some icy patches certainly across the north of the UK. As for Thursday, well, plenty of sunshine around, certainly across inland areas. Still showers feeding down in that north to northwesterly airstream. So showers continue across the north of Scotland during the first part of Thursday, a mixture of sleet, snow, some hail in places as well. A few showers pushing into Northern Ireland, but across the bulk of southern Scotland, northern England, and much of England and Wales. It's set fair, plenty of sunshine, but it will be a very cold start, as I say, with some frost and some ice in places too. As we go through the day, those showers start to feed down from the north and northwest. So many areas exposed to that north to northwesterly airstream will see some showers at times. And wherever you are, despite the sunshine elsewhere, it's going to be a cold day. feeling even colder in that north to northwesterly wind. Temperatures at the very best up to 6 or 7 Celsius down towards the south and southwest. 6 or 7 in the southwest there is in the low 40s in Fahrenheit, but feeling closer to or just below freezing in that brisk wind. As for Friday, well, lots of showers feeding in from the north and northwest. Again, they'll be wintry for many areas and a frosty start, and temperatures again struggling with those showers, if anything, becoming more widespread as we go into the weekend. Areas of rain and snow moving in from the southwest as we go through Saturday and Sunday. Could well give some disruption in places, so do keep tuned to the forecast if you can. I'll see you soon. Take care for now. Speak soon. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, Britain.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for subscribing.
Thank you for your support.
It's you that make us the People's Channel.
As we reflect on our journey so far, we're filled with immense gratitude.
You mean the world to us. We couldn't have reached this point without you.
As a very special thank you, we are giving you the chance to win one of 50 GB News thank you boxes. They're worth £50 each.
For full terms and conditions, and to enter, just go to gbnews.com/thank you.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin, where we're discussing reform's threat to the Labour Party. Now, time to hear your views. Jeff at home says, I genuinely think it's possible that Nigel Farage could become Prime Minister in 5 years, considering his momentum at the moment. Andy says, Matt, surely it's time for a Tory reform pact if they want a right-leaning government. Well, keep the views coming in. Now, a new year means New Year's messages from the leaders of our political parties. Here was Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer last night.
Until you can look forward and believe in the promise and the prosperity of Britain again, then this government will fight for you.
And here was leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch.
The party I now lead is going to do things differently. Watch this space.
And as you might have expected, the one that really stole the show was Reform UK leader Nigel Farage from Blenheim Palace.
Well, I'm fortunate today to be giving you this New Year's message from Blenheim Palace. Not only a magnificent place and a wonderful place to come and visit, but of course the birthplace of Winston Churchill, who represented something when this country was indeed a great country, not just in terms of looking after its own people, but in standing up for the right things in the world.
Well, what do you make of it all? Here to discuss those New Year messages, I'm joined by former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. John, which of the leaders connected with the country most strongly with their message, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure any of them did. Both Starmer and Nigel were very pessimistic, and I think the country is in the mood for wanting politicians who will lead them out of the problems rather than exaggerating them. And I think Kemi certainly got a only message across, which is the Conservative Party is changing, but it leaves anyone sympathetic to the Conservatives saying, yes, but how? Let's hear more about it.
She was criticised on social media for having a much shorter statement than both Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage.
Yeah, well, I assume the idea was that there was only one message in it, so that then all we can do is talk about that one message. There's some sense in that, but and as she said, watch this space. But I think it means that people who are sympathetic to the Conservatives are going to want to say, well, yeah, but get on with it. Let's have some of this change. We want some of the change. Yeah.
Nigel, a lot of people on social media saying that actually this was one of the first occasions where they felt that Nigel Farage looked more statesman-like, but prime ministerial, big historic setting, quite long details.
Blenheim Palace is not a bad place to do it from.
Yeah,
no.
What's your view?
Well, I mean, what we had was from the three main party leaders, Keir Starmer, Ed Davey, and Kemi Badenoch. They talked about change. Nigel then talked about effectively the past. So at least the three other leaders were looking to the future rather than taking Britain back to the past, which is the future as far as as far as reform is concerned. And the Greens had their own Christmas message, and they promised lots more greenery, as you would expect.
Although I notice Nigel Farage also used this term, make Britain great again. I mean, he's obviously learning from the Trump playbook. I mean, there seems to be something, about that ecosystem of Farage and Elon Musk and Trump. It seems to now be having quite an impact on British politics. Only today we saw Elon Musk again on social media saying, essentially, vote reform, it's the last chance for Britain. I mean, is this stuff going to make a difference?
Well, I mean, I would think that Nigel Farage will have a really good 2025, that I'd expect him to pick up a couple of by-elections, so he will increase the number of MPs. You're absolutely right. The momentum is certainly with him, and if you take the poll earlier this week, if that was translated a general election, which of course, as John said, it won't be, but it would give Reform 72 MPs. The worrying thing about that poll is it would give no government a majority. So what we're seeing is a very fragile kind of politics, and what reform will be a disruptor. Whether that'll be good for Britain at the end of it, we'll have to see.
But John, we had Sir John Curtis earlier on saying Starmer's problem is he doesn't really have a story, he doesn't have a narrative. I think that's instinctively true. I mean, I don't think Keir Starmer has really a big story. I mean, but where does he go from here? I mean, is this it for the next 4 years? Just a very unpopular Labour Prime Minister, very unpopular Labour government, very low growth rates in the economy? I mean, is this it now for Starmer?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I hope he goes back to what he originally promised the country, which was no big increases in taxes, a much faster growth trajectory, and that requires a set of very different policies from the ones that they set out in the budget. I think their main problem is economic. I think he's right in thinking it's the economy stupid, and he's now saying, well, of course, if I can just get people a little bit better off by the time of the election, it will all be right. No, it won't. It needs something better than that, because people are deeply dissatisfied with the whole of this century. For 24 years now, Britain has been trailing with the EU compared with America. And America is growing twice as fast. It's now twice as rich per head as we are. It is a shaming gap. And I thought we were going to have a government that's going to try and change that. And instead, all the changes they've made means it's going to get worse, not better. And so he really needs a radical change, probably needs to change his Chancellor.
I mean, well, I was watching the New Year messages, wondering to myself whether actually we're looking at two party leaders of the established left and right who may not be with us at the next general election. I mean, I think there's probably more than a 50% chance here that Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch may end up actually being replaced before we get to the 2028-29 general election.
I think Kemi Badenoch will be replaced. I think that's the Tory way. I think that unless she pulls the rabbit out of the hat pretty quickly, she will go. Keir Starmer has got 2/3 of the MPs in the House of Commons. So, as far as I can see, very difficult to mount any kind of leadership challenge against him. The problem at the moment, which I think that was what John Curtis was talking about, is the one big disappointment from the Labour government is the messaging has been really bad. Now, I know the people around Keir Starmer in Number 10, and I've worked with them. They are good. So either politicians aren't listening to the advice that their communications people are giving them, or they've suddenly lost the plot. And I rather think it's more likely to be the former than the latter.
But, I mean, just to go back to your point about the system working against smaller parties, I mean, the one thing that's working against both the Conservative and the Labour parties now is we have all this volatility in the system. We don't have the tribal allegiances that we used to have in the 1950s and 60s. My dad voted Labour, his dad voted Labour, or whatever it is. So you can go from an enormous Conservative majority under Boris Johnson to an enormous Labour majority under Keir Starmer, which means if you are Nigel Farage, you're probably looking at this very volatile, unpredictable, chaotic system and thinking, maybe there is actually a way to run through the middle here, do a little bit more than what the SDP almost did in the 1980s.
But Farage will be a disruptor, and that's the point about the way the polls have been showing. And OK, polls are only a snapshot of now, but what they're showing is that you wouldn't even be able to form a government if we had an election tomorrow. Both Labour couldn't get a coalition together, nor could the Tories.
Well, that's it for now. Sorry, John, we're going to have to move on. Thank you, though, to my panel. Always insightful. Now, in a moment, I'll be speaking to former Home Secretary Suella Braverman about the big debate that has been dominating social media over the last few years, which is the viral court transcript of a grooming gang that reveals the truly horrific nature of this scandal. We're going to be talking with the former Home Secretary right here. Don't go anywhere. Come back after the break. Matt Goodwin, State of the Nation.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello, here's your latest GB News winter sun forecast. And for some places, Madeira for example, it is going to be relatively warm to end the week. Lots of dry weather around some parts of southern Europe, but a different story across parts of Italy, Croatia into Greece. A little bit of rain pushing its way through here. Mostly dry across central and southern parts of Spain, a little bit wetter further north. And like I said, for Madeira, temperatures on the rise, getting into the low 20s by the end of the week. Elsewhere, temperatures nearer normal for the time of year.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The BBC has been branded jaw-achingly stupid, not by me, by the way, over its decision to cast black and ethnic minority actors in the historical drama of Wolf Hall. Now, is this a forward-thinking idea or nonsense? Are we rewriting history? Henry, I mean, the Tudors were real-life people. They were pretty much white.
Well, some of these shows depart so much from historical context anyway that maybe it doesn't make any difference. But I think just generally we've got a problem in this country with portraying history in its correct sense. You can't change history. And I think it's about the motivation. If the motivation is to sort of to some sort of, you know, to make a political point, then I think it's wrong.
What I find kind of tedious about people finding this instant jaw-droppingly stupid, Jesus was portrayed by somebody who's half Slovak and half Irish. Moses was portrayed in the Exodus by an Englishman. So, you know, same with Anne Boleyn, you know, was portrayed by Natalie Portman, who is Jewish. So if this is the one thing that's getting people angry, then there's something deeper within that rage, because I think Hollywood's been doing that, where people...
When you say something deeper, do you think there is a hidden racism and people are complaining about this?
Well, I think for some, maybe, yes. I can't speak for everybody because you know, this news dropped today. I don't know why they are thinking that it's egregious, but there absolutely must be some underlying racism if this is the only one that you're upset about.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, this is the scandal that still shames our nation and the people who claim to speak on our behalf. I am, of course, talking about the grooming gang scandal, the organised sexual exploitation and rape of young, white British girls and women by mainly Pakistani Muslim gangs. Some people call it the grooming gang scandal. I think we should just call it the rape gang scandal. Now, a court transcript from an Oxford grooming gang trial in 2013 has gone viral in recent days, owing to the horrific details that are so utterly debased, revealing the extent of the nature of the abuse that was handed out to girls as young as 12 and 13. So shocking are the details that the screenshots have millions of engagements online over the last few days, And even Elon Musk has weighed in, claiming that reform and the Reform Party, is our only hope. I'm not going to share all of the details from that court transcript on this programme. They are simply too horrific. I have tweeted some of them, so if you're interested, you can go and see. But I'm joined now by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who, to give Suella Braverman credit, was one of the only frontline politicians in recent history to really call out this scandal. Suella, it's good to have you with us. Now, I'm going to ask you the question that many people have been asking online over the last few days, which is why on earth, given the horrors that we are reading about, have so few people faced justice for overlooking this scandal, for failing to engage with this scandal, for failing to chase down the perpetrators? Why have not more heads rolled as a result of this grooming gang scandal?
Good to be with you, Matt, and thank you for covering this scandal, one of the biggest national scandals in our country's history. And GB News deserves special mention for being brave and courageous, for shining a light on the injustice. Many broadcasters, much of the mainstream media are too scared to talk about it. And that's really the answer to your question, actually. There's too much fear. And as a result of that fear, from top to bottom, there has been cover-up and silence and deflection. And the few of us who have dared to speak out and speak truth about the scandal, expose the failings, have often been branded as far right or racist, and unfairly and totally unjustifiably so. But that, I'm afraid, it's that culture that has pervaded into the wholesale cover-up. We're beginning to get justice in terms of the actual perpetrators receiving sentences through the criminal justice system. Far too late, in my opinion, but we had a landmark ruling earlier this year where over 100 years worth of sentences were handed down by the judge. But you're right, there are too many officials, social workers, teachers, counsellors, police officers who turned a blind eye. You've asked why haven't they been held to account? The reason is that, as many of the reports have found, there has been a gap in the law. And so there's not been an ability to hold those people to account retrospectively. Yeah. I disagree with that. I think there is actually grounds for negligence, but that's why I've been calling for a new duty to report, so that there's actually a legal obligation on professionals to report cases and instances of child sexual abuse when they see it.
I'm going to come back to that point in a second, because I want to discuss how we can have a harder approach to the I say men, but, you know, the sick individuals who are involved in this. I just want to ask you one thing, though. Ipso, not long ago, said that your claim about grooming gangs being mainly comprised of British Pakistani men was misleading. Of course, we've got a lot of independent government reports and bits of evidence and so on, that I would argue would support that. But, I mean, would you say that again? Do you think that judgment by Ipso was itself a reflection of this problem?
I disagree with the judgment by Ipso. I think that we've had a decade's worth of reports, from the original Alexis J report into Rotherham, to the Louise Casey report, to the more recent Alexis J report in 2023 when I was Home Secretary. We've had independent reports into Oldham, Oldham I should come to next, but Telford, Rotherham, Rochdale, each of which concluded that the perpetrators were mainly and overwhelmingly from Pakistani Muslim heritage. So that's independent experts saying that. That's not me making it up. That's the fact.
Let's come to that Oldham point, because, you know, there have been councils out there, including Oldham and others, who have been trying to get, I think it's fair to say, a wider inquiry to take place. I think I'm right in saying Labour Minister Jess Phillips has said she doesn't want to go ahead with that. I mean, what's your view there on this issue about, you know, local versus national inquiries?
I think local inquiries have a key role to play. If you think back to the original Rotherham report by Alexis J, that was the big turning point. That was the first time a comprehensive independent report was carried out, which exposed authoritatively the extent of the failings. And when they're localised, we can see who did what, when, or failed to do what and when. When it's national, some of those local personalities and failings can get overlooked. So I think localised independent reports, such as the one that Oldham Council is requesting, is absolutely the right thing that the government should support. And it's an outrage frankly, that Jess Phillips and this Home Office team have refused to do so. They've let down victims, and they're letting down the many failings, those who have been, whose lives have been destroyed by the grooming gang scandal.
One of the issues as well that I've often talked about is deporting some of the people involved in the grooming gangs who have dual nationality. I mean, we could use things like foreign aid and visa programs and so on to apply pressure to countries like Pakistan to basically take some of these, again, I say men, but take some of these criminals and abusers back and get them out of our country and keep the British people and our children safe and secure. Is that something you would support? I mean, how can we go further in this? How can we get tougher in making it clear we're not going to tolerate this behaviour?
Absolutely. We need to have a zero tolerance approach when it comes to deporting those foreign nationals who've been found guilty of these heinous crimes. One of the most unforgettable moments of my time as Home Secretary was when I visited Rotherham and Rochdale and when I met with survivors of grooming gangs rapes. They were now young women in their 30s, but they told me of the horrendous experiences they had gone through. And some of them told me how that pain and hurt and destruction was exacerbated by the fact that their perpetrators were still in the country and at large because the government, frankly, had failed to get them out of the United Kingdom. So this is adding insult to injury. And if we don't control our borders fundamentally in this way, then we again are part of the problem.
And it's also a problem I've seen in the universities. I remember not long ago speaking to academics at the University of Oxford talking about this scandal, and they denied that it was a serious scandal, at which point I had to point out to them that Oxford had a well-established grooming gang and that actually they were sort of falling over themselves to deny that this was a scandal of national significance. But out there, in terms of the wider country, to people watching this show, I mean, the industrial scale rape and harassment of young white girls is something that many people out there just can't get their heads around. And there have been people online today saying, look, it's time to name and shame public officials, police officers, social workers, local politicians who failed to take action. Would you agree with that?
I would. There have been some apologies that have emerged from various officials within policing, West Yorkshire Police, South Yorkshire Police, Greater Manchester Police over the years after various reports. But ultimately, no professional has been held to account directly or personally.
OK, Suella Braverman, well, I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's good to have your support for that. I think that's where this debate is going. Thank you, Suella Braverman, for joining us. Now, Patrick Christis is coming up right after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. Matt Goodwin with State of the Nation. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Let's keep it real and let's keep talking about these big issues that everybody else is ignoring. See you soon.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Things are looking much colder now across the UK over the next few days. There'll be plenty of sunshine around during the day, but also lots of frost and ice around during the overnight periods. Wintry showers in places too. Low pressure starting to pull away to the east of the UK now. That's allowing a cold northerly airstream to become established, and that's set to dominate the weather across the UK over the next few days. So overnight tonight, the last of the rain clears from the far southeast fairly promptly. Showers ease across the central slice of the UK, but showers continue across the north and northwest in that northwesterly airstream. And wherever you are, it's set to turn very chilly overnight, and widespread frost forming even in towns and cities, with some icy patches certainly across the north of the UK. As for Thursday, well, plenty of sunshine around, certainly across inland areas. Still showers feeding down in that north to northwesterly airstream. So showers continue across the north of Scotland during the first part of Thursday, a mixture of sleet, snow, some hail in places as well. A few showers pushing into Northern Ireland, but across the bulk of southern Scotland, northern England and much of England